Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I probably said good morning earlier too, but my brain is fried tonight. It is February 19th, 2025, and we are back for our fourth goal monitoring conversation with the superintendent. Appreciate your patience as we pulled this together tonight. It had to be rescheduled from a couple of weeks ago because of some schedule conflicts. So tonight we will be discussing Keystone Biology for first-time takers, and I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Good evening. I am Dr. Wayne Walters, proud superintendent of the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I am here with members of our leadership team. Thank you for being here tonight for this Education Committee presentation. As Mr. Walker shared, this is our fourth monthly public conversation where we are sharing how we are tracking our progress toward our defined goals. We want to be clear about how we're doing and where we can do better to help all our students succeed. Tonight, we are focusing on biology first-time test takers on the Keystone Biology exam. It is important to focus on students taking the Keystone Biology exam for the first time, as it is one of 3 Keystone exams needed to meet graduation requirements. Students can take the exam more than once if they do not pass the first time until the end of grade 11. However, our continuum of science classes after biology, which are traditionally chemistry and then physics, do not provide enough support to help students who need to take the biology exam a second or third time. Hence, the focus on first-time test takers. We continue to stay the course with our established goal, which is by the end of the 2024-2025 school year, we want 32.8% of our first-time test takers to be proficient in the Keystone Biology exam, as at the end of the 2020-2021 school year, only 24% of our students were proficient, which established our baseline for our 5-year goal of achieving 41.5% by 2027. And although the goal is presented in a collective stance, we know that we must address places and spaces where significant achievement gaps exist between our white students and our African American students, students learning English, known as English language learners, students with special learning needs, known as students with IEPs, and our economically disadvantaged students. And to help us see where we are and where we need to go, we use 2 key assessments: the Keystone Biology exam that will be reviewed shortly, and the classroom diagnostic tool known as the CDT that will be reviewed later in the presentation. And together, these assessments give us a complete picture of how our students are doing. So as it relates to Keystone Biology exam results of first-time test takers, 31.2% of our students were proficient last year in 2024. Our goal was for 32.8% of students to be proficient as a first-time test taker. However, we did not reach this goal. Although proficiency scores are low, I want to highlight the consistent growth from year to year, beginning with our baseline proficiency of 24% in 2021 to 24.5% in 2022, 27.2% in 2023, and now 31.2% in 2024, recognizing that each year consists of a different cohort of students. The data also shows us which areas need more attention based on subgroup examination. Our white students have the highest level of proficiency at 57.3% and have shown the most growth of 11.4% from 2021 to 2024. Our English language learners are next in levels of proficiency at 32.9%, with a growth of 7.8% from 2021 to 2024. Our economically disadvantaged students are next in proficiency levels at 19.2%, with growth of 5.5% from 2021 to 2024. Our African American students are next in levels of proficiency at 12.6%, with growth of 6.9% from 2021 to 2024. Last in levels of proficiency are our students with IEPs at 6%, with growth of 2.4% from 2021 to 2024. And I realize that we do have other subgroup populations in our district. However, our largest subgroups with significant disparities are presented. And while these data points give us a good snapshot of student outcomes, they don't tell the full story. Academic performance is just one piece of the puzzle. However, attendance plays a significant role in student outcomes as well. In recent years, attendance has become a major focus in school improvement efforts. Before outlining additional data, I want to define two relevant terms regarding attendance. The first is truancy, which is probably the more familiar term regarding attendance, as it counts only unexcused absences, emphasizes student compliance with school rules, and could result in legal ramifications. Chronic absenteeism, on the other hand, focuses on students who miss more than 10% of the school year at any given point and counts all absences, whether you are excused, unexcused, or suspended. And the emphasis is on the impact of missed days and the benefits of being present. So let me tell you why focusing on chronic absenteeism is so important. When we examine comparative data of our first-time proficient test takers in Keystone Biology by subgroups in 2024, we see some revealing data to add to the story of outcomes. Students who are chronically absent and proficient is represented by the blue bar. All students, regardless of attendance status, are represented by the orange bar, and regular attenders who are not chronically absent are represented by the green bar. In every subgroup, we see regular attenders having greater rates of proficiency compared to students who are chronically absent. This is significant, as it elevates the old saying that when you miss school, you miss out. Moreover, digging deeper, white students show the largest disparity of 35.9% between chronic attenders and regular attenders. Next in order, there is a three-way tie of 28.2% disparity of students who are chronically absent versus regular attenders with all students, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students. There's a similar disparity of 10.6% with African American students, followed by the smallest disparity of 7.1% with IEP students. And although the disparity is smaller between students with IEPs and African American students, the level of proficiency is quite small and closer to zero versus other subgroup populations, which lends itself to a smaller disparity gap. Again, I must reiterate that times have changed, and missing school, whether excused or unexcused, matters, and we have the data to prove it. And so with that in mind, it's essential that we continue to explore the effectiveness of our investments in improving student outcomes. So in researching our investments in philosophical shifts in science teaching and learning, professional learning, Keystone exam preparation, instructional materials and implementation, and aligned curriculum development over the past 2 years, there were some interesting discoveries. All these specific investments are critical constructs that warrant some level of discussion as they create alignment and coherence for our 19 biology teachers charged with advancing student outcomes. So in the area of philosophical shifts in science, teaching, and learning, the findings reveal that we have focused heavily on integrating the new STEELS standards, slated for implementation next school year, which is 25-26. The STEELS standards are Pennsylvania's science, technology, engineering, environmental literacy, and sustainability standards adopted by the Pennsylvania State Board of Education in July of 2022. It is aligned to the Next Generation Science Standards, which are the national standards for grades K through 12 that Pennsylvania adopted as part of its STEEL standards. And this shift is designed to transform how we teach science, emphasizing an integrated approach that encourages students to engage with real-world scientific problems. However, our review indicates that while considerable resources have been allocated for STEEL standards preparation, other critical areas such as enhancing understanding of diverse learning needs and effective teaching strategies have received only surface-level attention. This imbalance truly suggests a need for broader and more in-depth professional learning opportunities that encompass various aspects of modern educational practices alongside the new standards. In the area of professional learning, our efforts have aimed to build the mindset, skill set, and understanding of tools that impact diverse learners in alignment with our new instructional materials. Unfortunately, most of these efforts have been narrowly focused on preparing for the STEEL standards, without much attention to current conditions and immediate needs of our teachers and student outcomes. And this oversight highlights a gap between our preparation for future standards and the immediate application of these learnings to benefit our current goals. It is important to note that initial professional learning sessions saw strong participation and high attendance. Now engagement and attendance has declined in later sessions. And to address this, we're expanding the level of accessibility to professional learning opportunities, ensuring that all educators feel confident in delivering high-quality instruction. Our desired approach to Keystone exam preparation, using state-provided tools and resources, has the potential to seamlessly integrate exam content and expectations into daily instruction. This method helps students get used to the type of questions that they will see on the test while improving vocabulary and comprehension skills aligned with the biology Keystone demands. Continued focus on making this preparation a natural part of classroom activities is crucial for enhancing student performance on these critical assessments. And currently, Keystone exam preparation has been limited. Last school year, we adopted the National Geographic Biology instructional materials, featuring engaging content aimed at bringing biology to life. National Geographic Biology is the first high school biology program created with National Geographic images, photography, and explorers, a diverse group of scientists and engineers handpicked by National Geographic for their innovation and storytelling. Students build their fundamental biology knowledge with three-dimensional phenomena-based lessons that include engaging text, visuals, hands-on labs, and investigations, and a powerful digital platform called MindTap. And MindTap includes an interactive ebook with embedded videos featuring National Geographic explorers, interactive simulations, and virtual labs that transport students alongside explorers to different sites for virtual adventures and biology resource. And so before I begin to show a short video about the adopted instructional materials, which are aligned to the next generational science standards, there's a term that I want to define that has been used but not well understood or known. And the term is phenomenon-based science, which is singular for phenomena. And what it simply is something that happens or exists and can be observed or experienced, like a rainbow, a sunrise, fog, or lightning. And in the science classroom, a carefully chosen phenomenon can drive student inquiry as it adds relevance by showing science in the student's world. Therefore, phenomenon-based lessons begins with a phenomena as a means of engaging students authentically in their learning through inquiry. So now let's look at the short video.
The vast biological world surrounds our everyday lives. But did you ever stop to wonder how different organisms adapt to the unique challenges in their environment? How can we learn about places few have ever been? How can we inquire, engage, and collaborate in ways that lead to a deeper level of scientific discovery and problem solving? National Geographic Biology is the first high school biology program created with National Geographic images, photography, and explorers. This biology program aligns to the next generation science standards, following their three-dimensional approach to learning the scientific practices, concepts, and core ideas that biologists use in the lab and field. Students will build their fundamental biology knowledge with three-dimensional phenomenon-based lessons along with our powerful digital platform. National Geographic Biology engages students with authentic National Geographic explorers. As current experts in the field of biology, their stories bring biology to life, deepening students' understanding of relevant concepts with the help of National Geographic case studies, guided virtual investigations, and lesson videos. National Geographic has been inspiring learners for over 130 years. Our commitment to advancing education continues as we ask ourselves how we can capture the attention of all students and engage them in a way that takes them deeper into their learning than they ever anticipated, enabling them to construct true scientific meaning based on real understanding. Choose National Geographic Biology, and together we will transform teaching and learning in your biology classroom.
The introduction of online resources through MindTap that was previously mentioned has only been superficially addressed, and clear expectations for their use were not adequately established. Furthermore, a significant challenge arose with the late arrival of essential hands-on lab materials, which hindered the full implementation of these engaging new resources at the start of the last school year. And so ensuring that teachers are fully equipped to utilize these digital and physical tools effectively is essential for maximizing their potential to enhance student engagement and learning. So regarding aligned curriculum development, it is always our intention to develop curricula that effectively meets the diverse needs of our student population. Our district purchases instructional materials, and then we create the curriculum to support guidance and expectations in alignment with state mandates and district expectations for student and teacher experiences and outcomes. Curriculum is traditionally created in-house. The curriculum materials produced by our curriculum writers thus far have not fully met the goal of providing clear guidance for meeting the diverse needs of our student population. There is a significant need to refine the curriculum to ensure that they are truly inclusive and capable of addressing the varied learning styles and needs of all students. Moving forward, we will focus on creating curricula that not only align with the new standards, but also enhance educational experiences and outcomes for every student in our biology classes. As we delve deeper into our discussion on first-time test takers for the Keystone Biology exam, it is crucial to contrast this with the broader context of Keystone accountability measures, which include cumulative performances up to grade 11. Our attention on first-time test takers highlights our commitment to early and effective intervention, ensuring students are well prepared from the outset. However, the story behind our outcomes, especially post-pandemic, is an important narrative regarding student outcomes. As you may recall, students who do not achieve proficiency the first time, they have multiple opportunities until the end of 11th grade to achieve proficiency. The Keystone Biology exam consists of questions grouped into two modules. Module 1 is about cells and cell processes, and Module 2 is continuity and unity of life. And to reach proficiency, students need an average score of 1,500 from both modules of the Keystone exam. And so each time students take the Keystone exam, their scores are saved or banked. The highest score from each module is always used to help reach the 1,500 average, which means students can improve their proficiency score over time. Now, the COVID pandemic waiver granted by the United States Department of Education in 2019 and 2020 allowed students who passed the biology course that year to be granted automatic proficiency, meaning they were excluded from state accountability calculations. And so as a result, the number of students included in Keystone accountability fluctuated significantly, with only 294 students counted in 2022, 1,137 students in 2023, and 1,190 students in 2024. And so the waiver created a disruption in proficiency tracking, making it difficult to assess long-term performance trends. And in 2022, because of COVID-19, students were not required to take the Keystone Biology exam. And so if they passed their biology class, they were automatically marked as proficient. But their scores were not recorded in the official school accountability report. And this led to a significant drop in the number of students whose scores were counted in the Keystone Accountability Performance data, as seen on the next slide. And so by 2022, the students who had skipped the exam in 2020 were now in the 11th grade. And that's the year when their scores would have normally factored into accountability measures. And so, however, because many of them have been waived from testing, the official number of students counted in the report was significantly lower than in previous years. And so this explains why only 294 students were included in the 2022 accountability results, which is a sharp contrast to pre-pandemic years. And as students began taking the exam again in 2023 and 2024, the reported numbers created the growth towards pre-pandemic levels. And in 2024, we achieved a significant milestone by meeting our Keystone accountability goal, which is different than first-time test takers, with 34.5% proficiency. And so this achievement marks a significant step in our attempted recovery from the disruptions caused by the pandemic. And I realized that accountability results are different from tonight's goal of first-time test takers, but I was compelled to share the growth in Keystone Biology results based on the state accountability measures by all students and subgroup populations. And as you can see, the trends in subgroup populations and disparities are very similar to what has been shared about first-time test takers, with that dip in 2022 and slow growth coming out of that. And so this progress in Keystone Biology proficiency achieved under state accountability measures serves as a testament of our district's resilience and dedication to our academic recovery post-pandemic. And so now shifting from our Keystone results to a more granular tool used to measure ongoing student progress, let's delve into the Classroom Diagnostic Tool, or CDT. And the CDT provides us with critical real-time data on our students' understanding of biology throughout the school year, allowing us to adjust teaching strategies. CDT is given 3 times a year to measure Keystone skills. At this point, we completed the first and second administration, and I need to bring to your attention an additional challenge we have not seen in past goal monitoring conversations. We do not traditionally see assessment completion rates, which are outlined in the royal blue columns, in the upper 70%. Rather, we usually see 90s and upper 80s. And so you can see that there was some improvement in the second administration to the lower 80s. However, this has not been in alignment with the elementary trends you've seen in the past around assessment completion rates. And so high school principals have been addressed regarding the importance of CDT assessment completion to support effective data analysis. And moving on to the student portions, the student outcomes portion, the red range is the percentage of students not performing at or above grade level. So when you subtract that amount from 100, you get the difference, which is the percentage of students at or above grade level. The percentage of students likely proficient or advanced is calculated by the sum of the green above midpoint and the blue range. And so the overall results show that only 16.6% of first-time test takers are at or above grade level, and about 5.2% are expected to reach proficiency on the Keystone Biology exam at the time of the first administration. The second administration shows improvement of first-time test takers to 24.5% who are now at or above grade level, and about 12.1% expected to reach proficiency on the Keystone Biology exam if they took it at the second administration. This is a 7.9% increase in the percentage of students performing at or above grade level. And remember, students have not been exposed to all of the content of biology when the second administration was given, and we were not yet at the midpoint of the school year when the second administration was given. Now, when we look more closely and compare by subgroups, we see similar themes of low assessment completion rates ranging from 70% to 84% between both administrations in all subgroups except white students. Again, these assessment completion concerns have been elevated to high school principals for remedy. Moving on to the student outcomes portion of the chart, if we look in the light blue rows in the last column, there was a 13.2% increase in white students performing at or above grade level from the first administration of 31% to 44.3% on the second. Next in line of growth is our English language learners in the pink colored rows, where there was a 7.1% increase in performance at or above level from the first administration of 6.9% to 14% on the second. Our economically disadvantaged students directly below in peach showed a 5.8% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 7.2% to 13%. Our African American students at the top rows in yellow showed a 5.4% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 5.3% to 10.8%. Lastly, our students with IEPs in the middle in green showed a 5.3% increase in performance at or above grade level from the first administration of 6.3% to 11.6%. And so this shows us where we need to focus on helping different groups of students. And so with all of this data, analysis, and information, we are focusing on a plan for lasting improvement through what we call a continuous improvement cycle. And this means we will be planning, doing check-in, and then acting on making changes so that we can make sure our students keep improving. We can make changes to help students in real time and adjust our teaching methods as we go. And so this cycle will help us make sure each step we take is intentional and focused on helping students succeed. And these strategies do not negate some ongoing school-based strategies that address chronic absenteeism and the improvement of assessment completion rates. So our approach to these challenges include three main strategies based on best practices and research. Strategy one is focused on curriculum-based professional learning, as we want to ensure that all teachers and school leaders have a deep understanding of the standards and instructional practices necessary to deliver high-quality biology instruction. And so we're implementing a cohesive series of virtual professional learning opportunities to ensure teacher understanding of anchoring phenomena and pedagogy to make curriculum connections to students' lived experiences. We're going to utilize the March 7th, 2025 Professional Learning Half Day to support all 19 biology teachers with understanding of labs prior to implementation with students. We're going to be providing ongoing professional learning and support for principals to be delivered through monthly Leading and Learning Institutes, or what we call our principal meetings, network meetings, and other individualized support. And the science supervisor will conduct weekly classroom walkthroughs using an observation tool to track the fidelity of anchoring phenomena and lab integration. And this tool was designed using the innovation configuration model from work that they did with WestEd. And this walkthrough data will be shared with principals and assistant principals to monitor implementation trends. Strategy two is focused on creating access to standards-aligned resources and intentional practice with Keystone-style items to ensure both teachers and students are fully prepared for the expectations of the biology Keystone. And what we're doing is we're doing curriculum mapping to provide clear guides for teachers that aligns the biology curriculum with eligible content tested on the biology Keystone exam. And just for some information about eligible content, so we have state standards that explain what students should know, understand, and be able to do. Eligible content adds more definition and clarity to what that expectation is at that level. Using the released items provided to teachers, there's a comprehensive resource bank of released multiple choice and constructed response items, scoring rubrics, and sample resources. Professional learning sessions focused on how to analyze item structure, identify common student misconceptions, and integrate test items into daily instruction, and all of that will be offered. And those released items are provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. We want to provide guidance regarding ways to use released items as warm-ups, exit slips, and formative assessments, as well as incorporate constructed response prompts in discussions and assignments to strengthen reasoning and writing. And teachers can then analyze student responses to address misconceptions and guide students in reviewing sample answers and revising their own using rubrics. And lastly, using small group or peer tutoring to break down complex questions and refine responses, as well as scaffold academic language with sentence frames and discussions. And our final strategy is strategy 3, and it's focused on implementing data-driven practices to analyze student performance, identify learning gaps, and provide targeted instructional support that accelerates student growth and achievement, particularly for historically underserved students. And so the key components of this strategy include data literacy training to equip teachers and school leaders with the skills to analyze multiple data sources, such as classroom assessments, biology CDT results, Keystone practice assessments, and identify trends, gaps, and strengths in student performance. We want to provide a comprehensive data analysis protocol that analyzes CDT data to inform instructional decisions tailored to the diverse student needs in their classes. We want to create and share procedures to use data to provide differentiated instruction while creating small instructional groups for targeted interventions and enrichment. And differentiated instruction is something that's a natural occurrence in classrooms. It allows teachers to really use the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson to speak to content, process, product, and learning environment to frame those opportunities for differentiation in the classroom. And we want to create instructional resources aligned to data insights, including intervention guides and sample assessments. So those are 3 strategic responses regarding the data and all the challenges that we're seeing with biology implementation for first-time test takers. And so as I've shared in previous goal monitoring presentations, this is more than just sharing numbers. It's a commitment to a new way of governing our schools, focusing on transparency, accountability, and equity. And we're working hard to adjust our practices based on the data we have and doing everything we can to create a brighter future for every student in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. So thank you, and I look forward to our conversation as we continue on this journey to improve student outcomes in Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I'll transition over for the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Walters. We will give you just a minute to get settled, and we'll queue up questions from the board. All right. Who would like to go first? Is that smile for you, Miss Sugg? No? Oh, goodness. All right, let's pretend someone went first and someone can go second. Ms. Talaferro?
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Finish my sentences. And then thank you, Dr. Walters, for your presentation. I have, I guess, a couple questions. And one of the questions is more of a thought, which hopefully a question will come out of it, so I apologize in advance. But the first, I guess, I guess I'm just curious, so obviously this goal is focused on 9th grade biology. So you're only in 9th grade once. And so that's why it changes cohorts. And I understand that. My curiosity is whether or not we track or do we see changes as students move up in the other sciences? Like, are you seeing like stable, like they're just, the numbers are still low in other sciences beyond biology? I'm just wondering if there is any progress in learning when it comes to the sciences in particular.
Thank you for your question. So as it relates to the Keystone exams, there's only one state science examination in biology. So although they transition to chemistry and physics, there's no Keystone chemistry or no Keystone physics. The challenge is there are 3 Keystone exams that they take for graduation requirements. There's Algebra 1, there's biology, and literature. So literature is traditionally after the 10th grade. Biology is traditionally after the 9th grade. In one instance, there's one school that does it in 10th grade. And algebra is whenever they take that algebra course. So it could be 9th grade, it could be in 8th grade, it could be in 7th grade, depending on the school. Once they take, so in the math space, they're still on a math continuum if it's algebra, geometry, algebra 2, et cetera. In literature, they're still on the English continuum with literature, English 10, English 11. The challenge is in biology, when they leave biology and they go into chemistry, it's a completely different teacher certification. So a chemistry teacher does not have to have biology certification. A physics teacher does not have biology certification. And the challenge is how do we create those spaces for students to get support when they don't get it right on the first time, but they take the exam? Because the chemistry teacher is like, I'm focused on chemistry. The physics teacher is like, I'm doing physics. I'm not going back to do biology. And then how do we create those spaces? So we've tried a number of things over the years. We've done things like promise readiness courses. We've tried things to try to create support structures with after-school programs. The one thing we probably haven't tried to do that we probably could look at is how do we infuse some of these support structures into the chemistry and physics, knowing that that certification may not be there, and also the challenge of really creating that focus on biology. So that's why I pushed on the goal of first-time test takers, because that's the impact here when we have biology certified teachers teaching the subject of biology.
Okay, thank you for that. So I often ask the question, so you looped in, this significance of attendance and knowing that, chronic absenteeism, issues with truancy, especially at the high school grade levels, tend to be a difficult, and a struggle in how we address these areas. I know that there are schools, in particular in my district, though it's not a high school, what we say like schools like Schiller, who have been praised for how they address chronic absenteeism, but not necessarily, if it's not a specific to a school or how a school handles that, I don't feel like we have a strong approach as a district and how we handle that as, across all the schools that we have within the Pittsburgh Public Schools. So as you're aligning attendance, or at least, kind of having some content here about attendance and the impact that could have on this particular goal with biology, I guess my question is what expectations can we or do we have, or can we create district-wide that support chronic absenteeism, and not just let it rest in the hands of individual schools? So that's, I guess, my first question. If it exists, if it, in any capacity, and how we could address that.
So we have been doing a number of things to address chronic absenteeism district-wide. We monitor it. There's a data dashboard around it that we look at. Our assistant superintendents meet with their schools regularly to discuss chronic absenteeism. I think one of the pieces that we struggle with is just the environmental shift of moving from truancy to chronic absenteeism. That's why I illustrated both of those terms, because a lot of people understand truancy. They're like, oh, if I'm unexcused, that's the problem. So, and if I'm unexcused too many times, I may end up going to the magistrate. So that's sort of the culture that has been known for a long time. And then here comes this research about, like, it doesn't matter if you're unexcused or excused. If you miss school, you're missing out on learning. And we probably have not been as intentional in throwing the data in front of faces in ways that people can see the impact of even when you miss, even when it's excused, how achievement looks differently. And so today, or this, when we were preparing for this biology, because we didn't do it in the other presentations, of just looking to dig deeper to try to create some data to even support action, the chronic absenteeism piece kind of resonated, because there's a national movement around chronic absenteeism. I mean, I've been to several seminars, including the White House, to even discuss chronic absenteeism with folks from the Attendance Impact Network and work of Hetty Chang and other folks around this. So we've been trying to implement strategies to address it district-wide. We know some schools may have pushed leaning in more on it, but there's just this philosophy or this thinking that people feel, well, once I'm excused, I'm okay. But when it comes to student outcomes, no, you're not okay. If you miss school, you miss out. And so even if we may not deem the teaching to be perfect, we have the data to show that when you miss significant time, and this is just 10%, that the data in achievement outcomes look completely different. And so we've looked at it as a full group, and we've looked at it also across, different demographics. And so we can see the impact just in this particular first-time test takers where chronic absenteeism really impacts your ability to be successful. And so we'll continue on that movement of really sort of pushing into our families and our students that it's no longer about whether you're excused or unexcused. The idea is that you have to be present. Now, we've also sent some mixed messages, so I need to own that. Because we're coming out of a pandemic space, we've been telling students, if you're sick, stay home. You don't want to infect individuals. So I'm not sure if we're really out of that phase yet, but that was a real thing coming out of a pandemic when we were pushing on people like, I understand that we want you here, but if you're sick, please stay home and not infect others, because we are still trying to figure out what these different strains and these different things are. So we still encourage students that if they're sick and not feeling well to not come to school. And so that's the balance that we have to fight now. But I also wanted to highlight the fact that when you're in school, it does create a stronger impact on your outcomes than when you're not in school.
Thank you for that, and I would agree. Can't learn anything if you're not in the space to learn. And I think that's the most important part. The last thing that I wanted to just make sure that I mention in this space, as I'm looking at even what you talked about, the investments, and I think one of the parts I think I've been having a real hard time with since we've started doing this student outcomes focus data presentations. While I understand that you have to be able to invest the resource and the attention on the staff to deliver content, having the content to be delivered, and understanding these, other aspects of it, I always feel like it's focused on how we help the adults, that will ultimately help the students in their outcomes. But what I feel like is missing, like with you looping in that absenteeism and even truancy piece and acknowledging that students not being present in school is a part of that impact of, when we look at the numbers, what's missing to me is student support by way of like the social and emotional side of things. Because, you think of, I've worked with ninth grade students in the past, and I understand the struggle and the dynamics that happen with ninth graders coming from middle school into high school. They still have their, their eighth grade minds, and they are, they function in a way that, makes it hard for them to, adjust and settle. Plus, it's just being a teenager, being life. But we also know that there are real circumstances that happen that keep students out of school, whether it's students that are responsible for helping contribute to the home, and so they might have to work jobs, or they may have to take care of, other siblings, or there may be other responsibilities that keep them from being able to consistently come to school. And that is something we know to be true, which is why we implement, work such as, even just with the idea of community schools, right? That we understand that our students, like taking away those barriers when in the lifestyles of our students and the issues that our students are going through that cause them to not come to school, which are causing them to not be able to have access to their learning, which is causing, grades to come down, testing scores to be low, and that sort of thing. And so what I would really like to see and really invite to the conversation is how we better support students in that social emotional space, because that is a part of, when I ask myself, like, why do kids not want to come to school? Like, I've been in environments where kids loved being at school. Like, they could not, like, wait for it to be, the time where they can go back into that building and to experience learning. And that we know that learning can be exciting, but for some reason, we don't see that as a priority or something that we have to really invest in if we're looping in things like truancy and absenteeism as a factor. So I just want to just kind of say that as well.
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things to that, and then so first and foremost, we have made investments in the district as SEL. We just couldn't list the hundreds of investments that we've made. So we did adopt Wayfinder for our social emotional learning. We have a variety of programs and things that we're doing, and even refreshed that this year for student social emotional learning. What this presentation was about was just defining some high leverage points. And so the reason that we spend a lot of time focusing on teachers is because they are the game changers for student outcomes. Before all of the other environmental issues, we know how we respond when we have that high-quality teacher in front of us to transform, whether we hated science or not, how they engage us and make us really want to do things that we never thought were possible. And so that is usually, in a school setting, the first investment is creating high-quality teaching to serve students, because they are the number one service providers to our students in the school setting. So it's not to negate the social emotional learning piece, but just in the space of creating a small continuous improvement strategy to learn from, we chose 3 strategic responses to the data that we're seeing. But as a district, we do have Wayfinder, and we have implemented social emotional learning to continue to be a support construct for it. But for me and my understanding of teaching and learning, the teacher is the game changer when we think about student outcomes. And if they're not positioned for success through actually their learning, their experiences, and what we can offer in the forms of support and feedback, the students probably will not be as successful. Even with all of the social emotional investments that we've made, if they come ready socially and emotionally, but the teaching is not high quality, they probably aren't learning. And so yes, there is a social emotional part for students, but the high leverage strategy or the high leverage individual is the teacher. And so that was the rationale for investing in that. It's not negating social emotional learning, but we do make an investment, and I couldn't put all of the investments that we've done as a district in this presentation because we'd probably be here for about 7.5 hours.
It wouldn't be the first time that we've been in.
Well, it's not a practice that we think is healthy in the social emotional learning realm.
Not that I'm signing myself up for a 7.5-hour meeting, but I mean, and I appreciate you, kind of touching on that. I think I don't see one being more important than the other. I see them all being level playing field to be able to address how we improve the academic outcomes of students. Like I think, just that notion of testing is like such a negative space. If I'm a terrible test taker, so if that's the case for me, then even taking the test for the first time, I'm not going to do great because maybe testing makes me nervous, or maybe a situation happened that morning, and I think that to me is like it's just as important as making sure that, yes, I want us to have high quality teachers. You can't go in front of students and like not know how to teach and educate students and make them excited about learning. I don't want that to I don't want it to seem as though that's not valuable, because it is extremely valuable. We have to prepare our teachers to be able to teach. But I do think that that part is also important if we're addressing students as a whole, and not just students who are just, can crack the whip and focus on the academic side of things. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Udine. You're on mute, sir.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. One, how are we preparing parents and guardians to engage in this new learning along with students? And my second question is, does our tutoring system keep pace with students' needs as required by the data? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dean, for both of your questions. So the first one that you asked about parent engagement, right now we have not done a lot of parent engagement because the focus has been on really getting curriculum designed to support teachers, and then we can move into the parent space. But right now, we are not positioned yet for heavy, extensive parent engagement around our curriculum because there's still learning taking place around the instructional materials that we purchased and the development of a high-quality curriculum to support the diverse needs of students. Regarding the tutoring question, so the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, who has partnered with us, has sent library cards out to every student. And that they now have tutor.com, which is the investment that we made last year, but the Carnegie Library has that available. And so even if you go through the same methodology that you did while we had tutoring in our district, it was through something called Clever, you can click right there to get access to tutorial services. So it does keep pace because you can get into it, and whatever the questions or support you have, it's still available. Now, what I can't speak to is the level of engagement that students take to get tutoring support or not. But it is still available to students to get that support, and it can keep pace with whatever the needs students have.
Thank you. I just need to urge us not to forget about the importance of engaging parents and guardians in our children's education.
Absolutely, and agreed.
Thank you.
Dr. Reed.
Yeah, Dr. Walters, while you were speaking, it became clear that the same sort of phenomenon with the drop-off with regard to teacher participation in professional development in the sciences was similar as it was in reading. And so it feels like there may be not just like whether or not that professional development is engaging or whether or not teachers are finding it useful, but it feels like there may be something deeper there that that needs to be dug into. And my gut says that it has something to do with just like the culture of what the way we approach professional development, how we talk about it, the extent to which it is like readily applicable to teachers' practice. So it feels like there are some real issues with regard to professional development that go beyond just whether or not it's a good session or or it's interesting, but that speak to like sort of how we approach professional learning for teachers. And I won't mention again the weekly job embedded professional development, except I mentioned it.
Yes, and your recommendation for me to go back and do it as I initially proposed, I do remember. What I would say about professional learning is it is a shift in culture to think and believe that learning has to be ongoing. Some may believe that because I've acquired a degree that that's the learning that I need. Also, there are people who have particular values and beliefs about learning spaces that we are still trying to crack that nut. However, I will say that we do spend a lot of time in trying to design learning spaces for staff to really build their capacity to be high performers. The other thing I will say is that I guess it's a preview of one of the strategies that we did do. Once we got everyone on board with the professional learning, so the last one when we spoke about math with low attendance, once we involved principals, got teachers on board, really talked to them about the expectations and what happened, the attendance went back up. So I don't know if it's that we need to be always intentional to capture strong whys to accompany the what, and them having those experiences that brought them joy in that space to bring them back. Or if, and we do some whys, but maybe we need to be more intentional and more strategic about those ways that we invite people into those spaces. But we do spend a lot of time on making sure that it's hands-on, it's interactive. It engages with adult learning strategies and those things. But we just have a challenge with some people's belief on if it's important or even necessary for them in their profession right now. And so we will continue making those moves and working with our administrators to sort of push the envelope for them to have the experience that usually brings them back.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Are you up, Ms. Wilson? All right.
I'd like to agree with what Dr. Walters just said about professional learning and the views. In the past, however, there were times, well, one of the things always with professional learning is whether it's appropriate for that teacher to be there. There have been a lot of times in the past where some teachers were scheduled to go to certain professional development that had nothing to do with what they teach. So then you have that sometimes creates some pushback. I know this doesn't happen anymore, but we have had some administrators who treated their teachers like children, and even though these teachers have master's degrees and bachelor's degrees, some principals treated them like you don't know anything whatsoever and you need to go, and of course that causes a lot of pushback. But I just know this is not occurring anymore, but that has explained why some people push back to go into professional learning. And you're right, it needs to be stressed, the importance of the professional learning, not because you don't know something, but because this is going to improve what happens with student outcomes. There are a lot of changes. It's not always the same old as it always was. There's, as we know that technology has been changing for our children a lot more than it was when we were in school. We have to keep up and to be able to provide them with the opportunities that will enhance their education and make sure that they are successful as they continue through school. And so I think sometimes that purpose and showing exactly why it's necessary to be involved is sometimes missing, and that's why I appreciate hearing what you've said just now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. And yes, we have evolved from those spaces of where there was disconnection and lack of relevance to those who are pushed into spaces to learn. So I just wanted to put that caveat in there.
Other comments? Ms. Silk?
Thank you, and thank you again to Dr. Walters and to your team for putting this together. My first question is about the CDT assessment completion rate, and I appreciate you raising kind of the action step around that is addressing the issue with principals. do you have any insight as to why the participation rate is so low?
So at first when we looked at it, we didn't, but once we brought it up, there was an increase. It's not to the same level of the elementary school, so I guess when attention is being placed and to use scientific terms, brought under a microscope, we begin to see a little bit more. And so now there was attention through the microscope, it seemed to raise the attendance level, and I anticipate that this final administration will even see more participation. But in the elementary schools, we did not see that level, but it was very apparent and obvious when we looked at the data around the assessment completion rate that that was significant. And it's not a one-day exam, there's a window. So I wanted to put that in place too, that people may say, well, maybe they were absent on that day, but the CDT is a window of time. It's not a day that's planned for you to take the CDT. There's a window, so students have opportunities within that window to take the assessment. So it was bothersome to me, and we elevated it, and we saw some improvement, and I look forward to more improvement now that we're in the science space and under a microscope.
Thank you so much. And you did share a little bit more about in strategy 1, the walkthrough protocol, and it sounds like that's something that was designed with WestEd, I think I heard you say. Because those walkthroughs are so critical to getting the real on-the-ground sense of instructional practices that are addressing the needs of our historically underserved students. Can you give us a specific example or two of what's included in that protocol? Like what is a look for that would support these subpopulations that we're particularly concerned about?
Sure. So where do I start? Okay, I'll give you a little bit of historical context. So a part of the WestEd work that they did was really around supporting the implementation of the instructional materials. And so some of the tools that they used come from the work of Jean Hall and Shirley Hord around change. So there are things like stages of concern, levels of use, innovation configuration. And so the levels of use speak to like how people adopt changes, how they respond to changes, the stages of concern, or just what it says about stages of concern that individuals go through, and then there's the innovation configurations. And so what they did, there was some adaptation for Pittsburgh Public Schools, and so there were certain themes. So they looked at like the teacher as facilitator and how they function in that space of being a facilitator and not the answer giver. The use of materials, thinking about how do they make sense of phenomena and not just give it away, but like, hey, there's this phenomena, I'm not gonna give you the answer, but we're gonna promote inquiry. Phenomena itself on, how is that being used to motivate and engage students? The kinds of questions that students are asking based on the prompting and the voice that students are having. And so those are some major areas that they do in these walkthroughs. And really what they look for is what are students doing, what the teacher is doing, and what are the artifacts that are present to elevate this learning. And then the last piece of that walkthrough is really just sort of talking to students, like, what are you doing today? Are you working on figuring something out or trying to solve a problem, and what is that problem? So those questions give you a lot of insight into whether I'm dealing with inquiry or not, or whether I'm doing a worksheet, whether I'm experiencing science and functioning as a scientist, or whether I'm being told science. So the walkthrough tool is really around this innovation configuration that still comes out of that research from Shirley Hord, Jean Hall and Shirley Hord, connected into the work that we're doing. So that's what that walkthrough tool does. And so the science supervisor is placed in that position with a knowledge base around the instructional materials and actually being able to give feedback and support intentionally in that way. I don't know if that answers your question. But
It does.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I do have one more,
Sure.
and it's around strategy number 3 in the differentiated instruction.
Yes.
That I did hear you describe as naturally occurring. In my experience, fabulous teachers absolutely can naturally differentiate instruction when they are set up for success and have the resources that they need. And so I'm wondering, both for differentiating for our students who are struggling to meet that proficient goal, and for our students who are exceeding and need additional challenge. To what extent do our teachers have the staffing, whether it's a para in the room or push-in support, whatever that might be, so staffing and resources so that that differentiation is naturally occurring, and how much more would be possible, or I guess to what extent do our teachers have those resources and staffing levels now, and how might they be better served with different school configurations?
Yes, great question. So the work of differentiated instruction, some people may view it as I need an assistant to do it, but it is probably the hardest thing that teachers do, is to actually understand how to differentiate instruction. And then people have their own understanding of what can be differentiated. So like I shared earlier, I'll go back to the work of Caroline Tomlinson, who's a guru of differentiated instruction, and she highlights that there are only 4 things that you truly differentiate: content, the process, the product, and the learning environment. But at the root of differentiation is data. So that, because some may feel like this is your group and this is where you live, but differentiation is rooted in a particular skill that has been informed by that data, and you say, okay, you may live in this space for a while, but it is not your residence. And it's certainly not your sentence, as in long term. And so the idea is that whenever curriculum offers support, or is supposed to offer support in particular strategies to differentiate. So for instance, if the standard is, hey, I need to be able to count by tens, you know, my experience may be, hey, I'm starting at the beginning, so my experience or my expectation at the beginning point may be something very simple. While another group has shown competence that like they can do this by 100, so I'm still going to do tens but create a different opportunity. Or then this one group may say, hey, I'm going to put this in a word problem for you to really kind of navigate this same skill. But they're working on the same skill, but it's really based on the pace to build capacity so that they can get there. And so the processes may look different, the outcome may look different, but it's still rooted in that same standard. And so that's the challenge that teachers have. And sometimes people may view it as a paraprofessional can make that happen, but it's still the teacher that has to frame that full expectation. And that para is simply kind of supporting because they're not the person that really can like implement that or execute on that. But it still comes a lot with teacher planning. And so that's why we push this idea of using professional learning communities to talk to colleagues. Now, of course, in smaller spaces, you may not have a colleague to talk to. But if you have a school like in high school, they probably can talk to other teachers about, hey, I'm thinking about this in my community. What ideas do you have outside of perhaps maybe what's illustrated in the instructional materials suggestions or in the curriculum as possible? But I think there's this belief that, hey, you know, you need a para in order to differentiate, and that's not actually the case. But the resources are there to support differentiation, but it is probably one of the most challenging things to do in the teaching profession is to navigate these different spaces of where students are and using that data to really kind of not only create those spaces, but monitor the achievement and the outcomes of those spaces to move the work forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, any others? So I do have one, and I think it's more of a statement than a question, but we'll see what happens. I'm following Devin's role model here. It's been a long day. So we've talked about this before when we talked about reading and we've talked about math, right? The challenge that our teachers face in teaching those subjects in a way that makes it relevant for students so that they can look at those subjects and say, yes, this makes sense. I can use this in some other form other than school. I don't know if it's just me, but I think the challenge is even greater when you're talking about biology. And so I'm curious, like, what are we working on? What strategies are we trying to implement to make biology, science in general relevant for high school kids who likely don't see themselves as scientists and they're just trying to get through?
So I'll say two things. One, it's probably more relevant than we think in our market. Whether we want to admit it or not, we're a university in a medical town. And so a lot of our students enter into those medical spaces. There is no access to the medical profession unless you go through biology. There's no access. That is the prerequisite to get access to become a nurse or any medical profession that we're doing is through biology. The other piece that I think we're struggling with is because we are behind our students with technology, but we have to understand that although we have all these surveys about too much screen time or those kind of things for young people, that is their world. That's where they get their information. That's where they get excited. That's where they look for to become interested. And this National Geographic, because I remember as a child getting the National Geographic magazine and always being in awe of like the clarity of the pictures of like, oh my goodness, this is what a real toucan looks like. Look at the color versus my impression of a toucan through Fruit Loops. And so, I'm like, they're situated in the rainforest. Look at the color, look at the vibrancy. And then I started to ask questions, and that was my connection at that time through that magazine. But now we have this Mind Tap that like actually takes them places where explorers are going. And I believe that the engagement level is what gets you interested. And if you can kind of make it relevant and connect the dots, and that's the whole idea of Phenomena, if you can get students to understand, like, these are things that you may see every day, how do I connect the dots for you for relevance? It probably will pull you in. But I think a lot of times we're like, well, hey, and as an educator, I sometimes struggle with why isn't my passion your passion? But the reality is my passion is not your passion, and I have to work really hard to create spaces that you can become passionate about something that I've already arrived at being passionate about. And biology is one of those places. I mean, interestingly enough, at first onset, biology probably is not interesting. There's certain parts of it that if it hits you, you're like, oh, is that why that works that way? And so that's why the hands-on experiences are important, but really, I think this engagement with the devices that we give all of our students and the opportunity to tap into Mind Tap to see like, oh, wow, that's really cool, because students always are intrigued by things that like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's the pull-in. And so it comes to a space and time where now we have to understand that we're competing for the minds of our children. And for them, tech is where they live. That's where they breathe. That's why parents are spending money and tools to turn off their internet Wi-Fi in their homes and stealing phones by bedtime for curfew and all these other lists of things in trying to address it. Because if you leave it up to students, they will continue doing that. And adults, I will just say to you that you probably do it on the weekends with Netflix. And just get really addicted, and next thing you know, it's 3:30 in the morning and you are binging. And so the same interest of like you having that episode and you want to know what's next, and a platform, I'm not doing advertising for Netflix, but the same idea that you can see what's next coming up creates this kind of intrigue that you just want more. And I think that's the same experiences that our students need, and we must think through of how we deliver that for our students in a course that may seem abstract, like biology.
No, I think that's a good point. I think that the continued kind of search for how do we continue to be creative in our instruction, in our delivery, in our methods, in our partnerships. Right? We do live. We do live with UPMC and AHN and all of those places where I think partnerships make sense in some of these harder subject matters to give young people an opportunity to actually see it in action, to potentially, especially for Black and brown kids, to potentially see Black and brown professionals doing this work. Because oftentimes, scientists generally live in their labs; they're not hanging out spaces where our kids are hanging out. So we need to figure out how do we get our kids into those spaces. So I appreciate that, and we'll challenge all of us to continue to think about how do we get more creative with how we do this work, so that students who can get bored easily continue to stay engaged. Well, great. So if there are no other questions or comments, I want to thank you, Dr. Walters, for your presentation. Thank you, board, for your engagement and conversation. And thank everyone who's either online or here with us for sticking with us for a slightly longer than normal evening. This was done partially by design so that we didn't actually have to create another day to come back, knowing that we have 3 days in a row next week as well. So with that, I will bid you all good night. If you're driving home, please be safe and stay warm. And spring is coming, I'm sure of it. Have a good night, everyone.